What's really going on, everybody? Back again with the What's Really Going On podcast, episode number 87. Before we get into our very frequent and special guests, please be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at WRGO Pod. Be sure to watch us on YouTube, where you can watch all of our videos in full and see our lovely faces. Be sure just to subscribe, like, listen, share on all of our audio platforms. That includes Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. We are once again, for the third time, joined by the lovely Maya King, who has decided to come on and talk to us. She last talked to us after the 2020 election and joined Henry and I at Sankofa for our first live show. Henry, when was that? That was in 2018. Way back in the day. Back when
way before I even joined, honestly, or at least joined on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. That feels like so long ago. Yeah. Wow.
You're a friend of the show, man.
Yes. That was back when Henry and I were recording on iPhones.
Show.
No, we were virtual before it was trendy. That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
There it is.
Let them know, McKinney.
So Maya, first off, before we get into our questions for you, how are you? It's been a while since our listeners have heard from you.
Yes, I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for having me as always. I am doing well, adjusting to a new move and a new coverage area, covering the South and living in Atlanta. It's been lovely and busy and crazy, but rewarding nonetheless. And excited to talk about all that with you guys.
Yeah, so I guess
I love you, but I gotta keep the same energy. Go back home. We full.
I know, right? No, I got here and saw everyone who was down here already. I met like so many old friends coming out the woodwork who lived here, and then seeing even more people coming in. And I'm starting to be like, Atlanta is full. It took me 6 weeks to find a place that was reasonably priced. So yeah, no, I join you in that, or at least I sympathize with that feeling, because Atlanta is full.
Listen.
Yeah, so I guess to begin, Maya, for our listeners who don't know, you are a Florida native. So I guess what makes covering politics in the South so fascinating, I would say, especially when considering kind of the geographic and cultural changes that Henry just mentioned. What kind of makes covering the region exciting in politics right now?
Yeah, well, I think that the South is the forefront of some of the biggest and most exciting stories to tell in politics. Of course, Georgia becoming the center of the political universe. Did I go out? That's my mama calling.
You're okay. You're still here.
All right. Okay. She'll go to voicemail. But sorry about that.
Okay.
I think Georgia in particular, like I said, is one of the most interesting political stories to tell right now, just because you have so many different dynamics at the forefront. I mean, today in Washington with the January 6th committee having yet another hearing. Here in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, is sort of at the forefront of that story. Former President Trump, really pressured him to be at one of the people who overturned the 2020 election in the state. And then you also have, this big issue of abortion. Georgia has a heartbeat bill kind of held up in federal court right now. Yeah. Guns is another huge issue, and race. Stacey Abrams, if she does win in November, would be the first Black woman to win governorship in American history. There's a lot that I can talk about, I think, for hours, and why the South is so important. But I think a lot of people who have said it even better than me have made this point that essentially what happens in the South, I think, has implications for what happens in the rest of the country. And I agree with them in saying that. I've observed it already in my coverage.
You got I want to rebuttal to so much, but I'm gonna try to ease it all in here. You spoke about how important Georgia's race is, especially right now we have 2 Black people running for Senate. What's your outlook on this race, being that this is historical, and then we have 2 Black people on both sides? I don't personally know Hershel outside of him being a football legend, so it was very interesting to see that he's kind of advanced this far. But nonetheless, what's your outlook here? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, most people don't know Herschel outside of him being a football star. That's part of what has made him so popular already. It's what helped him win the primary so easily. I believe he cleared the field by like 60 points in May. This race is interesting because, as you point out, Henry, we have two Black men on the ticket. So regardless of what happens, there will be a Black man from Georgia representing the state in the most powerful chamber in the country, in the world, really. But they're two totally different candidates. I mean, could not be any more different. In Warnock, you have this this figure who is not only large in politics as a senator, but also in religion at the helm of Ebenezer Baptist Church. This was a position that Martin Luther King Jr. and Sr. held. Also from Atlanta, sort of representing the I would say urban center of Georgia politics in a really big way. Morehouse man, but also just, again, this huge figure in Democratic politics and in the Black church. In Walker, you have someone who has never run for office before. Someone that, I mean, outside of the University of Georgia, he was, he's a huge Georgia figure, though he was living in Texas for a long time before running for office here. And is just very synonymous with sports, not so much politics. And as we've learned very recently, has a lot of things to answer for, lots of claims about his business that have been overblown, making points about more recently that he was a member of law enforcement when he really was not. Of course, there are the allegations of domestic violence that he has addressed, and but nonetheless, continue to come up. And today and on Tuesday, the news that he has a couple of children that he did not talk about before, despite
you also wrote about. Yeah.
I did, despite, and it's I'm gonna clear this. I want to say this because I think it's important. The story here is less about the fact that this man has a lot of children that he hasn't talked about, though he is a public figure and voters can make their decision. But I think the bigger thing to remember is that this is someone who has talked a lot about how in the Black community, in his view, fathers are often absent, or that they're not involved enough in their children's lives, or that they don't do enough for their kids. They leave the responsibilities of taking care of the children to the women, to their mothers. He has railed against that repeatedly on conservative media. The reason why this exactly. So, before Tuesday, the world only knew Walker to be a very involved father of one child. Today, we know that he has 3 other children, that he kind of sees some of them, one of them, 2 of them maybe, is not super involved in some of their lives, as we know now, as with the information that we know now, that's what we understand, and unclear of the level of financial or emotional support there either. So a little bit of hypocrisy there. So yes, all that to say, huh?
My question
on the right side then.
You said what? I'm sorry, you just went out.
Wait, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, I was just like kind of jokingly saying it sounds like he's on the right side with his hypocrisy.
Oh, well, again, I'll let the voters decide that one.
I guess on that race in particular, my question is, do you think, I think obviously there's kind of a lot of buzz about, possible down Democratic turnout in 2020. Do you think kind of Walker's star level within the state and kind of people not really knowing that kind of other side, or kind of the non kind of front facing stuff, do you think that can kind of carry him to the seat, or like kind of, people can kind of be asleep at the wheel and all of a sudden people wake up in Georgia and Herschel Walker's their senator? Do you think that's like a possibility? Or
Georgia voters are some of the most plugged in and like politically aware in the country right now, especially after what happened in 2020, and that's true of Democrats and Republicans. There is definitely some voter fatigue, I think, especially among Democrats. Democrats really have to worry about turning out, but Republican voters, they know who Herschel Walker is and they love him regardless of what he does.
Especially in
Perhaps only in Georgia. I grew up on the Florida-Georgia line and in Tallahassee. And I mean, that's Florida State. So there's that. But people, I mean, I knew who Herschel Walker was growing up, but it wasn't until I moved to Atlanta that I really understood. I mean, he's like, it's kind of like there's God, there's family, there's Herschel, and then there's like football. You know, there's Herschel and then there's football.
He was in my head, he's to UGA what Mike Vick was to the Falcons before all of that went astray.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't really follow football, so I'm gonna trust that means something, Henry.
But I will ask, like, since we're talking about Georgia voters and like Georgia, I guess, candidates and stuff like that. When it comes to Stacey Abrams, it seems like her campaign is doing things a little differently this year or this go around. Do you think that's because there's a changing narrative in the Democratic Party, or is that because Georgia Kemp might be favoriting more than her? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I kind of want to turn the question back around on you and see what you've observed that you feel is different from 2018 to this year.
I'll answer that gladly and truly.
Go ahead.
Every time I meet with them,
Atlanta native, go ahead.
Every time I meet with them, I'll be like, if Stacey don't win, she better not come crying. I'm not, whatever. Y'all know the word. My emotions getting hot because one, I stay in Cobb County. That's one of the wealthier counties in this metropolitan area, right? So when you think about that, I see no posters, no commercials, no nothing. When she ran in 2018, was it 2020, something like that? I was in DC, mind you. I heard about her on social media. I heard about her. She made a national presence. Like, we knew Stacey Abrams was running for Georgia governorship. This time, I have not seen her. I might see an Instagram post because I just so happen to follow her. But other than that, no, where's Stacey Abrams? And it's
I definitely agree. I feel like, I feel like her presence was more known outside of the state of Georgia. And I just assumed that it was just stronger in Georgia this go around, just like focusing on the actual voters. But I don't know, like, I don't feel like I see the ads as much compared to her her first run. So I don't know, but I mean, I guess, like, do you think that people are still going to vote? Because I mean, I guess, like, are people still talking about it, or like, what is it like?
I'm sorry. That I think that for me, that's why I'm so like passionate about it, or like, because in my head, I'm thinking she's operating off the basis that she has this bandwidth of people who are ready to go to the bat for her and ready. But Maya, you just said it. We're fatigued. We're tired. We're tired of voting and not getting results. We're tired of voting and not seeing any type of, you know what I'm saying, change.
So you think that she should fall back then?
No, what I'm saying is I think she's operating off this big momentum that she's gained previously. And she feels like she still has that like same momentum, and she can kind of just, put my name on the ballot. I'm here.
So you think she's comfortable? You think she's comfortable?
Yes, I very much think that. Now, Maya, tell me the real, because I'm emotional now.
I mean, if you're asking how voters feel, I think, Henry, you've just captured it. You're a Georgia voter, and you're a member of a real. I mean, you don't. let me not gas you too much, but I can say from a strategy standpoint, I mean, I think the Abrams campaign has largely relied on the 2018 playbook, which is, try to gin up support in Metro Atlanta and lean into turning out, rural voters in places that Democrats have not often thought to go to get support in these, maybe 50, 60% white counties that are 40, 50% Black. That really are going to make the difference in November. But as Henry has very passionately pointed out, voters need a reason to turn out. And I think that really the last year has been really hard, and especially on the voters that Stacey Abrams needs, right? Like young voters, Black voters, Black women. These are all groups that have really been hard hit by the pandemic, groups that will be hard hit by policy with the potential of Roe v. Wade being overturned soon. Student loan debt isn't really going anywhere. the economy being what it is, prices are still high. These are like not even issues that a governor alone can fix, but Republicans in their messaging have repeatedly railed against Democrats by saying this is their fault. And I won't even put this all on Republicans, actually, because the truth is, and I think this is what's resonating with a lot of voters, especially in a place like Georgia where people really fancy themselves. And I think it's true as sort of very unique or just like far enough away from Washington that they don't really have to think about that stuff. Is, Democrats currently have control of the White House, of the House of Representatives, and of the Senate, and all these issues are still compounding and still like directly impacting them. So there, I think, is this feeling, I think that goes into this idea of voter fatigue, again, among these key groups, Black voters, young voters, swing voters, that Democrats didn't really do what they said they were going to do. And whether or not that impacts Abrams, I don't know. I think the same is true of Warnock. Those two are running kind of different campaigns. But again, if Abrams is focused on, let's do all we can in Atlanta and get the people that we need to get in rural Georgia, it might mean that she has to kind of revamp her messaging. And my last point is that I think her campaign the message has been very, very policy focused. Like, Stacey is talking about Medicaid expansion all the time. She just unrolled her new plan for gun safety that she believes can get Republican support this morning. Last week, it was proposing $50,000 floor for teachers in Georgia. Like, she is running a campaign that's like, this is what I'm going to do if I'm in office. These are the policies, these are the tangible things that you can get. She's not really doing the like rah, I'm Stacey. I think because she knows people know who she is this time around. So now it's about, here's exactly what I plan to do when I get into office. I don't know how that plays with voters.
Can you like break us, like just shortly, like what is her policy on the gun? What is that? What was her rollout on that?
Yeah, it came out this morning. And honestly, I need to read it a little bit more closely. This morning, I was focused largely on Hershel and his new children. But as I understand it, essentially the loose framework of it is kind of breaking down some of that red tape that exists around guns, particularly as it relates to like age limits. The boyfriend loophole is a really big thing, essentially a rule that if somebody has a history of domestic violence or is perceived to be a threat against another person, extensive enough background check that might get in the way of their ability to purchase a gun. I mean, she's proposing things that she believes Republicans will get on board with. Whether or not that happens, though, I don't know. Republicans really.
Yeah, my question to you, Maya, is do you think that kind of because I think like Mackenzie and I don't live in Georgia, but we knew about Abrams because her campaign had kind of a passion and kind of a youthfulness to it. Do you think kind of her, and she barely lost, and I think if she wasn't running against the Secretary of State, there could have been a different outcome depending. Do you think that this kind of policy kind of middle of the ground focus is kind of almost, do you think if the campaign was being honest, do you think that kind of approach is almost punting that like, hey, Dem enthusiasm is low? Because as someone who works in politics, that's what I hear, is that they're kind of banking on like the enthusiasm that took us almost to the finish line in 2018 might not be there. So we need to find somewhere else to get it from. That's how I read that, but I'm curious on your
I think that's a smart read. And I don't know if that's how the campaign would view it, though. I'm a reporter. I get spin all day because campaigns are always scared that someone will come up, will hear this and then write a story that's like kind of negative. But I mean, there's got to be some kind of an acknowledgement at this point, right, among any smart campaign that Democrats are fatigued and that that they're either, I mean, I think that really the way it goes right now with the electorate in Georgia is you either have like fired up Democrats who are always going to vote no matter what, same with Republicans, Democrats who are really frustrated and might vote for Republicans this year, and Democrats who are really frustrated and might not vote at all or vote third party or not support the party that they're registered with. And I mean, with Abrams' approach to policy, it's like, well, I think that's right, Noah, like propose the things that are going to get people's attention, that are in the news the most, and that I can try to say that I'm going to do, just to get the votes. Like, I think that's just the way that they are looking at it at like a very basic level. Is like, okay, guns are a really big issue right now with these shootings. Here's my policy proposal to make Georgia safer. On the flip side of that, though, I mean, Brian Kemp, like in Georgia right now, there is a constitutional carry law in place, which means anybody can buy and carry a gun, essentially, even if you don't have a permit, in the name of self-defense. That hasn't blown up.
Shootings going on in the city.
Well, and I think, and Brian Kemp has said, even in campaign events, yeah, you see Atlanta up there, that really unsafe city. Yeah, all those bad guys have guns. So you yourself, a good guy, you go get one so you can defend yourself. That is the calculus. And like I said, you know, it could set up for something really tragic, or it could be like, okay, we all have guns now. This is how we defend ourselves. It's the Wild West in Atlanta.
That's what it's sounding like. The Wild West of Atlanta.
Yeah.
Like, the logic.
Well, that's why Abrams has come out with this gun framework that I need to read more closely to understand, because I mean, in her view, and I think in the eyes of a number of people, including gun owners, people who have owned guns for a long time will tell you, like, this is nothing to play with. It's nothing to just go out and get. Crazy. Yeah, like, you know, people who are pro Second Amendment, but not necessarily pro mass shooting, will tell you, like, there's a middle ground to be had here. And polling bears that out. Even national polling in Texas, even polling has shown that the vast majority of gun owners are not really in favor of like automatic weapons and open carry, and one's ability, if they have a history of domestic violence or mental illness, being able to purchase guns, or a 17 or 18-year-old being able to purchase guns. There's also the age limit question. And all this is happening in Georgia as DC senators try to hammer out some kind of a gun framework, and the question swirling around that being whether or not it actually, you know, does anything in the end to stop these mass shootings from happening.
Yeah, go ahead, Mackenzie.
Yeah, I guess I just brought it up because I wanted to know, because honestly, like, I mean, I'm not in Georgia, and I know, like, I don't know how much teachers make, and I'm sure it's really low, but I just also feel like, is her strategy with the $50,000, like, is the bar really that low? Like, that's really not.
I can answer that question. The average household.
Well, I mean, I can answer the question
that's what
too.
I'm telling
I understand.
You. The average household salary in Georgia is $55,000. Minimum wage is still $725.
I mean, I understand that. I'm just saying that, like, the strategy of still saying, like, yeah, that's a win. I still feel like, I don't know, I feel like Democrats are still playing it very safe. And that's also, I feel like personally, that kind of plays into voter fatigue, because it's kind of like, we're gonna like during the pandemic, people don't stand in line for like, get something that's still then rent is still going up. You still get the paycheck and you're still gonna come up short. It's just like, still, I feel like, yes, that is great. I understand that minimum wage is low, but it's still like overall, I just hope that if she is playing that, and if she does get into office, it's still a push like that. They should still be making more. And it's not just like, that's the ceiling for teachers, because I still feel like that's still low, like, in general.
Well, and you also have to think about like the demographics of like even this conversation, right? We're all Black, college educated, making above minimum wage. I am assuming under the age of 30. Like, these are the voters that Democrats absolutely need to turn out. And we're sitting here talking about the issues at hand and what would get us to turn out or not. And we're thinking about things way differently than the folks who make laws, who are predominantly white and like over the age of 70 and have been doing their jobs for, you know, since our parents were our age.
As long as we've been born.
Yeah, or much longer. And I think there's that generational disconnect that also does not get talked about enough, which plays into a class disconnect as well, which is way bigger than the race disconnect that kind of dominates political conversation right now.
Yeah, and I think kind of pivoting to a larger scale, I think that kind of what Mackenzie and what you just talked about, Maya, is kind of, you know, how do you kind of see, the South as it pertains to kind of 2022 and beyond? Because I think, as someone who kind of works in Democratic politics-ish adjacent, I think you always kind of hear the, eventually the South is going to turn in Democrats' favor and then the math is going to switch. But I think what you're talking about is, I can sense some skepticism in that there's a lot more stuff that needs to be done on a cultural level, but also on a policy level. So, I mean, kind of how do you, because I see it very much so as like, people can talk about how Florida was going to, turn blue for the longest until, Andrew Gillum actually got crushed in the election for governor. And now it's kind of like Florida's not even really a talking point anymore.
Well, he ain't getting crushed. Don't do my old man.
But think about it. The narrative going into that was
Tallahassee. Okay, I forgot.
But think about it. Remember in 2018, the narrative was that he was going to win and that Bill Nelson was going to win. And in the end, it didn't even go to really a recount. And I see very like interesting connections between how people kind of view Florida for that one little minute in Georgia, where I think kind of like, I'm wondering if 2020 will just kind of be the exception, not the rule. And I think this election I'm curious of your kind of outlook as someone who, now who's from Florida and has seen politics there, but also, now lives in Georgia and writes about politics in the South.
Well, Noah, your question is the question, whether or not 2020 was a one-off or the beginning of a trend. And the answer is like, yes, right? Like, it's like, well, I don't know.
You think so?
No, I mean, the South is in play if you do the work, if you do the organizing to put it in play. Any state is in play if it has the infrastructure for the party to make it competitive. But the South is unique in that it has a disproportionate population of people who ostensibly would favor Democratic policies. It's overwhelmingly Black, growing number of Asian American and also Latino voters, growing number of younger college-educated voters, still, a large number of white college-educated and also lower income folks of all races. I mean, I think the class thing is like the income level is a little bit different because that really does depend on kind of like your race and a lot of other factors. But the first couple that I laid out, like this should be a rich area for Democrats to take advantage of. But a couple of problems, including Republican-held state houses that have managed to pass like very restrictive voting rights laws that make it harder for these people to turn out. Gerrymandering also makes it a lot more difficult for people of color to really have.
Which is huge in Georgia.
It's the biggest thing, and it's huge in Georgia. It's huge in Alabama, Louisiana, Texas.
The South.
I mean, at this point,
you know that line.
Yeah,
that line.
The black belt, and also the line definitely. So like Florida is one of those states that Democrats were able to win when they were highly organized, when they had the people out to be able to turn out voters and deliver a message that got Democratic voters excited, or voters in period excited to vote for Democrats. In Florida, you have a lot of like older white folks, especially, from the North, who have come down, who bring their politics with them. Those are largely conservatives, but you also have a lot of like Black folks in the Panhandle, where I come from. Those are largely Democratic voters. Do they always turn out? It depends on the age and a lot of other factors. And then you have a lot of different Latino populations. You have white Cubans, you also have brown Cubans, you have Venezuelans, you have Guatemalans, you have Mexicans, all these different people, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans. They all vote differently. All these blocks vote differently and have different sensibilities about them. You can't place Latinos in one box in the way that we often like to place Black voters in one box. It's a little bit different. But Black voters we're not a monolith, but Black voters vote more monolithically. So it's just, and that's just Florida. North Carolina, was blue and has a Democratic governor, but I don't know the margin that Biden lost North Carolina in 2020, but like it's no longer really in play for Democrats. So they thought that they had North Carolina when they had it, and I think the closer that we get to November, when I talk to sources in Georgia, that is the question: is Georgia going to become like North Carolina, where Democrats had this really great moment and then it's not anymore? But I still believe that Georgia is unique among the southern states because it has this infrastructure of organizers in place that is like no other. This is a place where Stacey Abrams really did shine. She founded the New Georgia Project. and she also has Fair Fight. These are two organizations that are super, super well funded. And in the case of the New Georgia Project, had been in place for almost a decade, kind of building up to this, to the moment that we saw in 2020. Black Voters Matter with LaTosha Brown, Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Like there's like a dozen organizations that have been in place since like pre-Obama almost, that have been doing this work forever. And so when 2020 came, they kind of coordinated, but they also all just like really leaned into their strengths. And it wasn't even a wave even then, right? Like Biden won by fewer than 12,000 votes. That was all that work they had to put in for that to happen. But that's like also, you know, that's the beauty of democracy in many ways. Not to make light of that, but like that's what happens when you do the work and when you turn people out. And in Trump and in COVID, I think those two big things gave voters a reason to feel like they really had to line up and turn out. They don't really have that same, like, I'm voting against this attitude. And then Democrats have not really given them something strong to vote for. That Obama 08 and 12 energy that we saw was outshined by anti-Trump energy in 2020. It's not materializing in one direction or the other.
But
Republicans
say it's not giving what it's supposed to give.
It's not given what it was supposed to have gave, but for Republicans, it's like, you know, it's something to get mad at, especially for the Republicans who were like, Trump makes me really uncomfortable and voted for Biden, you know, in 2020, and now have really latched on to the party message of he hasn't done anything. And also he's like really old and doesn't seem to like, I want to be sensitive about this. I'm not trying to say that they think he's senile. I think they think that they just want something new, and that he's like kind of slow moving on a lot of this stuff that they wanted to see happen.
Well, Maya, before I kick it to someone else for questions, that's also what we say.
But that's also why I brought up Stacey Abrams though, because I'm just like, I feel like there's just also, I feel like I'm seeing a pattern in Democratic leaders is just like playing it too safe. And then once you get there, you're playing it even safer. So it's kind of like, for me, that would be pulling out voter fatigue, because it's just like, you're already playing it safe. And there's really no hope that you're there. I have no hope because you don't push it further when you get into office. So like that promise that they might have, like, oh, just vote for me in. And then when I get there, I'll do more. But it's like, we've seen in the past that you guys don't do more. So I'm kind of over it at this point.
Yeah. Well, I guess this would be a good way to transition, since you softly mentioned Trump, because the national conversation right now is like focused on like the special committee investigation into the January 6th, like riot on the Capitol. How do you think like that story is being perceived in the staff, especially given Trump's like influence here meaning Georgia, and the people he's like kind of forced to run or, you know, supported or whatever? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I was just in South Carolina for the last week covering a congressional race there, and was assigned a story to talk to more people about how they felt about this after the first night. And the takeaway that I get, and it's my colleagues have written about it since then, is that this hasn't really, so I think that the idea here was to lay out what the committee found, and really like the findings of this of the January 6th committee are pretty compelling, regardless of what side you're on this. But I think what they also meant to do was sort of change minds among those folks who might have said, I don't know what happened that day, really. Like I don't who might have wanted to see it for Trump. Just try to push a pro lowercase d democracy message. But I think ultimately what it did was just push people further into their silos. Like for Democratic voters and folks who saw what happened on January 6th and were really disturbed by that and felt like the president was in the wrong and felt like that was an attack on like Democratic establishments and put people's lives in danger. All of that was just bared out even more for them. Like watching this has only further proved that point. And for the folks who believe that the riots on the Capitol were overblown, that Democrats are seeking to sensationalize this whole thing, that folks, were angry and have the right to protest. Like, all of that also seems pretty true to them watching the attack. But as a journalist, I'm always going to be biased towards democracy. And I don't think I'd put myself in trouble by saying that, like, to be very clear-eyed about what happened that day as an attack in Iraq on, or a real, like, something that really did put democracy in danger. It's it is Democrats that are obviously, like, making that message the clearest. And they have the overwhelming majority on the January 6th committee, but I mean, that is what happened. It's just unfortunate that the way that it's been presented and the way that things have gone down, the way that even the former president has characterized the whole committee and the day has made a lot of people feel like that's not the case.
I wonder though, are people still even paying attention to this? Like, I just feel like so many other things, like the general public, I mean, like, are people still having an opinion on this? Are people still wanting them to be held accountable? Like, is there still like that charge for them to be held accountable? I know I want them to be held accountable, but I have not been paying attention to like the press briefings or anything of that, honestly. And I'm just curious to like what the general public's thought is on holding these people accountable still.
I think it depends on the definition of accountability. Like, some of the folks who stormed the Capitol are in DC jail right now. And you have, but then that even has been politicized and mischaracterized through some bad faith actors who have said that these are political prisoners and people who are being held in these terrible, awful conditions in the DC jail that they somehow did not pay attention to before. I mean, it is true. The conditions in jail are terrible, but we should care about that regardless of who's in there. I mean, I think that voters or just folks who are watching this, might not necessarily understand what could take place from here, whether this really sets up an opportunity for Trump to be like, what's the word I'm looking for? Excuse me. To face, thank you, to face the consequences in any meaningful way after this, which is probably not going to happen. I think that makes it all the more confusing and pushes people further into their corners.
But before I kick it to Mackenzie for the last question, I have like a personal question that I'm sure Mackenzie and Henry will be interested in. Of course, Biden is not, in the Oval Office himself. He also has a vice president named Kamala Harris, who's played to me a very fascinating role. Since the administration began, I think some parts of it, kind of questioning her work have been a little bit unfair, and sometimes she kind of focused on foreign policy. But where do you kind of see her role in the administration and kind of her career looking forward? Because I would say that, if I was a betting person, I would say that Biden is one term. And I think that makes her kind of political future very interesting and very uncertain. But I'm curious on kind of your outlook on it.
I mean, I think that I don't know. Like,
y'all heard what Cat Williams said. They said
I want to say
a black woman because she only mind her business, not nobody else's.
Hello, and I don't. But I'll say this: it's a couple of things. But first, a lot of people have been like very disappointed in the vice president saying that she hasn't done a lot. But I want us to remember that the office of the vice president literally is just to be there if the president dies. Like that's really like what it, I mean, you obviously have a portfolio, which she does have, and we can talk about that because she got like all the most unpopular policies too in that porportfolio, right? Voting rights, immigration,
a lot of foreign affairs stuff, which is like
a lot of stuff
popular.
that's like, that's like, she doesn't, this is she's an attorney. Anyway, and the vice president, like in the past has like never really been like the super forward facing, does a lot kind of figure. Harris is a former senator, so she understands how a lot of this stuff works in the upper levels of power, but like this is her first time like kind of on this level of things. And there are a number of different scenarios Biden and those who his spokespeople have repeatedly said that he will run for a second term.
Mm-hmm.
That is no question. But there are also folks, as my colleagues have reported, who look at that and are a little scared because they're like, he'll be knocking on 82.
Like 82.
Oh,
he's literally my grandmother's age, which I love my grandma. I love my grandma, but I don't know.
But you don't want her keeping a schedule that tight.
Yeah,
you don't want grandma running the country.
So
Why
my
would you
thing is, do the Democrats care about who's in office? Because I'm not voting for Biden a second time. I'm gonna tell you that now. I'm not.
Well, I would say that's probably indicative of a problem that they're not either seeing or know how to adjust to.
I do think that they see it. I do think that they see it, but it is so delicate because, as we pointed out, Democrats can be like cautious to a fault about stuff. And what's going to have to happen if they decide that Biden is not going to be their standard bearer in 2024 is they're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off and figure out who is going to be that person. As vice president, Kamala Harris would likely have first dibs at that. But I think we can also look at 2016 when Joe Biden wanted to run.
Open season. It'd be open season.
Yeah,
everybody
and it will be. It will be. Like names like Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, even, who has not ruled it out.
Mackenzie Marshall.
I'm about to say, like, I feel like at this
point,
it was too many options in what was it? 20 whatever. It was too many options. 2020. It was too many options, in my opinion. I do like the fact that there was a large, diverse, air quotes now, group. However, listen, people are indecisive. They don't know what they want. They need somebody that they can trust, they can lean on, that they know will lead. Biden not that person. We not messing with Kamala, but she might be a saving grace because, like you said, like when you put it in the perspective that you just said, like, well, she's the vice president. If you look at history, vice presidents really don't be out there doing a lot, like out there like that. So when I was listening, I'm like, dang, like, okay. But still, like, she had a hard time getting to where she
No, I feel like what you're doing though is putting a lot of expectations on the girl. When she was like, if that's the role to like fall back, then nobody else was doing that.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is hearing it from that perspective, I can now kind of like, okay, dang, maybe I'm being a little too hard on Kamala.
Yeah.
But it's like
there are people who might agree with you. And I was just gonna say too, it's gonna depend on who's running in 2024. If Trump runs again, like a couple questions I have, like look at your face, Henry. You look stressed at the thought.
Bro, I ain't got time. Do not have time.
That would be insane.
But
he is unless he dies.
I was gonna say,
he is unless he dies.
Right, like
I'm tired of this simulation. Give me the red pill.
He is the front runner for the Republicans. He is the front runner. That's like, that is a given. I think he is.
So if he runs again, now we have a situation where a lot of Democrats might be like, oh, hell, because I'm like so frustrated with this party and they're not doing a lot for me and they haven't. But at the same time, like there's this guy that I hate who I've already tried to vote out once, who's running again. Now I got to go back up to the precinct and try to do that again. That's a possible scenario, right? Where like Kamala gets in again as that. But I mean, people voted for Biden too, like because they thought he was like this really safe old white man who can beat Trump.
It was a means to an end.
You took
right. And so whoever is taking his place, like if it's Kamala, if it's Pete Buttigieg, again, if it's Amy Klobuchar, anybody, whoever is, or if it's Joe Biden, they're gonna have to be able to make. Henry look just as stressed at Joe. I'm stressed watching your face, man. Whoever it is going to have to be able to make that very clear argument, which Biden was successful at doing, but he had help because COVID was raging. Trump wasn't doing anything about that. Really, it's crazy when you look back on 2020 because the environment, the conditions were just right for Democrats to be able to win. And I kind of hope that's not the case in 2024. Another pandemic, like, economic turmoil, people sick and dying and like, just needing a lifeline and looking for hope in someone that can give us that. Like, I would like to get back to the baseline of like, okay, there are a lot of things that I don't like and a lot of things that are going not the way I want. Here's someone who offers the best decision. Like, I'm tired of voting to save my life. And I think a lot of people share that, especially it's like my second election ever voting
That's
in, like
where
being
I
over the
get
age of
annoyed.
2018.
That's literally where
So
I get annoyed.
Yeah, and I think before we wrap, I think it's interesting because I think to your point, Maya, like that you kind of said earlier that like there's an age problem, and I think that I think Democrats are probably going to meet the rubber of the road of like they just need, when stuff is going bad, and if people who are our age, all in their mid late 20s, are all feeling a certain type of way, I don't think they have good messengers to talk to us, and the messengers who they do have, they don't really amplify or give a good platform to. So I think it's just kind of like they're only compounding issues of like people like us feel a very different way than the people in power, but they have no one to communicate to those people. Like they don't have anyone to communicate to me on issues. They don't, especially I think, which is going to really be important, they don't have anyone to communicate to Mackenzie on the very kind of like narrow things that Black women face and kind of how Roe v. Wade and that stuff impacts Mackenzie more so and you more so than anyone else.
or I'll say this real quick.
A big problem.
I'll add just very quickly, they do, but they might not actually be communicating to the people that they think they're communicating to, or they hire someone or they what they really need are like, working low income, non-college educated Black voters. And they hire hotshots like Mackenzie and I from DC and Atlanta to go in and communicate with them. Or I won't bring Mackenzie.
No, but Maya,
but that's fair. That is fair, though.
Like, and
we're not.
Mackenzie would turn it around. You tripping?
Or like, I mean, Mackenzie, you might be able to speak to this. Like, you might be able to say, okay, look, this is where I come from, and I know that I look crazy coming and talking to you, but I'm trying to keep it real with you. Or I might be able to do the same thing. But that takes so much work. Yeah. Like, and I don't even know if I'm capable. I mean, I come in as this big national reporter sometimes and talk to people, and they're like, okay, you might look like me, but are you really going to do my story justice? And I'm like, you know what? That's a good question. I don't know. And I think that's part
so
of it.
many nails today for me. Because I think that, like, when I kept doing this, I just wanted to, like, is that where we are in, like, American politics and just America? Like, the young fighting the old, the conservatorship of this old America, who this is how we operated with this two-party system, blah, 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 versus this, like, new, innovative, free-thinking generation of people who definitely want to hold you accountable, don't necessarily know the correct structure of holding someone accountable. Then we have all these like entitlements and justifiable rights that we feel like we deserve, but nobody's speaking directly toward that. And like you guys just said, when they do directly try to speak to us, it's the wrong person. Because I mean, yeah, I'm from Atlanta and I grew up in a certain environment, but I don't even relate to them people like that for real. And I'm not like trying to be funny. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm really not. I'm serious.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It was definitely how you said it.
It really was. Anyway,
I'm being for real though. Like, it's just like it don't click. Like that, I was telling Mackenzie yesterday, I'm about to run for keep playing, but I feel like it's so much chaos in every time the Black vote or like you said, like we feel like we're dying for our lives. So this is why I'm voting. It's a big, overwhelming circumstantial reason as to why I'm voting, not because I genuinely like am interested or vested in this. Because like I just said, I'm not voting for Biden again. I won't vote in 2024 if he's the front runner for Democratic Party. And I'm gonna stand on that because, bro, my student loan's still here. Inflation not getting no better. This fake oil crisis y'all got going on. Like, what is you doing, Playboy?
And then you just, I don't want to say something controversial. I really don't.
Do it.
Respectfully, like I just the $1 billion to the Ukraine that they're like, that's insane. I'm sorry. Like there's just a lot of problems on the home front that I feel like are not being addressed. If we have really $1 billion to just wire send us another country, that's crazy to me. That's insane. But actually, before we go though, Maya, is there any projects or anything that you're working on that you want to share or shout out or anything cool?
Nothing really at the moment. I'm just working, trying to get these stories in the paper. That's what I'm doing more than anything else. But you know, if anybody has any scoops, anybody know of any places in Georgia to go to get some news where maybe I haven't looked before. You know, if you're a Black voter, you've been contacted by the GOP, let me know. That's what I'm gonna do, is just put a plug out to give me some news, keep me working, keep me in business.
Well,
Awesome.
Maya, we definitely enjoyed you. We talked about a lot. That's why I love having you on. We
really
could
good.
it's like
We cover a lot of ground.
Our people, you know, you get what we talking about, you know.
Oh, thank you, Henry. Let's get lunch soon, Henry. You down the road from me.
No, we definitely got to. We got to.
Here it is. So
in asterisks, they'll never meet.
The Howard way.
They'll never meet.
The Howard way. Let's hang out, and we never do. No, I'm gonna text you. We'll make it happen.
Dot. So Maya, thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate it for the third time, and we know for certain it will not be the last. So if you are listening to this episode and liked, be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at WRGO Pod. Be sure to check this video out on YouTube, where you can watch our 4 lovely faces all in our entirety. Be sure to check out any and all of our audio platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Play, iHeartRadio. Henry's looking at me and nodding because yes, I got them all. So thank you for watching. This is episode number.
Hey, go give my